Welcome to Food Analogy, where we explore the history, culture, and science behind what we eat. Don't forget to subscribe.
Look, I want you to picture this. You're driving through almost any major city in the US or Canada. Atlanta, Chicago, Philly, New York, Toronto. And if you're from Toronto like myself and you pull into a predominantly black neighborhood, these are the landmarks you're guaranteed to see. A barbershop, a corner store, a church, and definitely a Chinese restaurant. You know, the spot with the bulletproof or plexiglass, and also the brightly lit menu board with photos of the food that have been fading since 1998. You can get 4 chicken wings and pork fried rice for a price that somehow still makes sense in today's economy. It's such a staple of the culture that we don't even question it anymore. But have you ever actually stopped to ask, why? Why is there a Chinese takeout joint in virtually every black neighborhood in North America? Welcome to the Food Analogy Podcast. I'm your host, Odain Mitchell, and today we're talking about redlining, immigration, survival economics, and how a plate of sweet and sour chicken tell one of the most complex stories of race and geography in North America. Now, in order to understand the takeout spot on the corner, we have to go back in time. We can't talk about food without talking about real estate, and we can't talk about real estate without talking about systematic racism. So let's rewind to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Both the US and Canada had heavy influxes of Chinese immigrants, largely brought over as cheap labor to build the transcontinental railroads. But once those railroads were finished, both countries essentially said, thanks, but you can't stay. The US passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, and Canada passed the Chinese Immigration Act in 1923. Both were explicitly designed to stop Chinese people from entering the country and to make life miserable for the ones already there. So, where do you go when the law of the land is openly hostile to your existence? You group together for safety and you form Chinatowns. But here is where the story intersects with black history. In the early to mid 20th century, millions of black Americans were moving north and west during the Great Migration to escape the Jim Crow South. In Canada, black communities were establishing themselves in urban centers like Toronto and Halifax. But when black folks and Chinese folks tried to find housing, they hit the exact same brick wall: redlining. Banks and government agencies literally drew red lines on maps around neighborhoods deemed hazardous for investment. If you weren't white, you were forced into these red line districts. Restrictive housing covenants made it illegal for property owners in white neighborhoods to sell or rent to black or Asian people. So, the Chinese community and the black community were geographically forced into the same zip codes. They were pushed to the margins of the cities, living side by side because white society wouldn't let them live anywhere else. Listen, the proximity wasn't an accident, it was a policy. Okay, so now we have 2 marginalized groups sharing the same physical space. How does that turn into the restaurant dynamic we see today? Let's fast forward to the 1960s and 70s. We see a phenomenon called white flight. As integration became the law, the residents fled urban centers for the suburbs, taking their tax dollars with them. And right behind them went the major supermarkets and the grocery chains and the banks. This created what we now call food deserts. Neighborhoods where residents have little to no access to fresh, affordable food. Now, put yourself in the shoes of a new Chinese immigrant arriving in the 70s or 80s. You might not speak perfect English. Your degrees from back home aren't recognized here. How do you survive? You open up a business with a low barrier to entry. A laundromat, a corner store, or a restaurant. But you can't open that restaurant in the wealthy suburbs. The rent is just way too high, and they might not rent you anyways. So you look for commercial spaces with cheap rent. Where are those spaces? In the divested red line black neighborhoods that the big supermarkets just abandoned. These Chinese entrepreneurs saw a void and they filled it. They offered hot, calorie-dense, inexpensive food in neighborhoods that have been starved of dining options. It was pure survival economics. The Chinese family needed to make a living in a society that marginalized them, and the black community needed affordable food in neighborhoods that the city had forgotten. So we know why the Chinese restaurants open in the black neighborhoods. But let's talk about the food, because what they are serving is a cultural mashup. If you go to a traditional restaurant in Beijing or Guangdong, you are not finding General Tso chicken, and you are certainly not finding chicken wings and French fries. These restaurant owners were incredibly savvy. They realized early on that to survive, they had to cater to the palate of the people spending money in their stores. They adapted quickly. They start frying chicken and offering cheap side of fries. You see hyperlocal examples of this all over. I mean, if you're in Washington, D.C., you know about Mumbo sauce, a sweet, tangy, reddish sauce that goes on wings and fries. It was popularized by Chinese takeout spots in black neighborhoods in D.C. In Chicago, it's the mild sauce. In Canada, you'll see specific adaptations of Caribbean Chinese fusion depending on the neighborhood's demographics. It is quite literally a culinary bridge built out of necessity. But I want to keep it 100 with you. This relationship hasn't always been perfect. It's complex. On one hand, these restaurants are neighborhood institutions. The people working behind the counters watch kids grow up. They know everybody's order. On the other hand, there has historically been tension. You have a dynamic where people from outside the community own the businesses, extracting dollars from a black neighborhood without always reinvesting those dollars back into the community. And if you add in language barriers, the physical barrier of bulletproof glass, and the stress of systematic poverty, you have a recipe for friction. We saw this boil over in places like Los Angeles in the 90s. It's a relationship built on a transactional foundation, but over decades it has evolved into a shared, intertwined history. Two groups of people told by the system that they do not belong, figuring out how to survive on the same exact street corner. So the next time you walk into your local spot and smell the grease and the soy sauce, or the next time you order that number 4 combo, take a second to think about the history on your plate. That restaurant isn't just a place to get a quick cheap meal. It is a monument to survival. It's a physical reminder of racist housing policies, immigrant hustle, and the incredible resilience of black communities making a way out of no way. It is a very specific, distinctly North American story. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. If you learned something today, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, and share with somebody you usually get takeout with. I'm Odin Mitchell, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.